Kaya's small fingers worked gently at the corners of the wrapping paper, her face glowing with the kind of delicate anticipation only a child could hold. The room was silent, too silent for a Christmas morning. There was no festive music, no chatter, no laughter. Just the soft, almost sacred sound of tearing paper as she peeled away the shiny silver wrapping. For a brief second, her lips curled into a smile, hopeful, sweet, full of the belief that something magical was about to happen. But as the lid of the box lifted and she peered inside, the light in her face shifted. Her eyebrows knit together in confusion, and her small shoulders tensed. She reached inside as if something might be tucked into a corner or hidden beneath the flaps. But there was nothing. No toy. No note. Just an empty cardboard box. Before her mother could react, a cold, bark-like laugh pierced the stillness. It came from Frank, Kaya's grandfather, sitting comfortably in his favorite armchair by the fire, one leg crossed over the other, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Kids like her shouldn't expect anything," he muttered, barely glancing in Kaya's direction. "The world's already got enough leeches." The words hung in the air like smoke, bitter, heavy, and hard to breathe. Kaya froze, her little hands still inside the box. It was as if she thought maybe she'd missed something, maybe the gift was invisible and would appear if she waited just a second longer. But it never came. Her mother, Amelia, sat across the room, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt the heat rise up her chest, her heart pounding against her ribs. Words welled in her throat, but they wouldn't come out. They snagged like barbed wire, sharp and tangled. The urge to stand, to scream, to grab her daughter and leave was overwhelming, but she sat still, frozen in that horrible, fragile moment. Sandra, Amelia's older sister, glanced up from her phone and snorted. "She's just like her mother," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Always expecting handouts. Worthless." Amelia's jaw clenched. The sting was sharp, but not unfamiliar. She'd heard this tone before, years of it, in fact. That same icy dismissal, that same smug superiority that defined every holiday, every gathering, every moment spent in that immaculate house. Kaya didn't cry. Not yet. But her chin began to tremble, and her lips pressed into a tight line. Her big brown eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She glanced up at her mother, not asking for help, not even seeking comfort, just checking. Checking to see if she should pretend it didn't hurt. And in that instant, Amelia hated herself. She hated that she had brought Kaya here. Hated the optimism she had clung to when she agreed to make the trip. Hated the hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be different. That maybe her father would be different. But of course, he wasn't. To him, Kaya was just another reminder. Of Amelia's divorce. Of her mistakes. Of the way she had chosen to build a life on her own, outside the rigid, unforgiving mold her parents had crafted. Kaya wasn't a beloved granddaughter. She was a symbol of everything Frank disapproved of. The room was oppressively still, save for the ticking of the old grandfather clock and the gentle hum of the heater. Each second felt louder, like a countdown to a moment Amelia didn't want to face. Kaya looked down at the box again. Her fingers brushed the inside edges, then slowly, with deliberate care, she closed the flaps. Her hands trembled. Then, in the smallest voice, she spoke. "I got you a gift too, Grandpa." The sentence sliced through the tension like glass breaking. Everyone in the room turned to look. Frank raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Oh yeah?" he said with a dry chuckle. "This should be good." Kaya didn't react. She stood up, pulled something from the pocket of her coat, a small, carefully folded piece of paper, and walked across the room. She held it out with both hands, arms extended in offering. And in that moment, something shifted. Amelia felt it in her chest. It wasn't over. Not yet. Something else was coming. She looked at her daughter, this small, brave child, and saw someone trying. Truly trying. To love. To give. To be kind in the face of cruelty. Kaya had been excited to come. She had asked about her grandfather for weeks. "Do I have one?" she had asked one night as Amelia tucked her in. "A grandpa?" It was her way of wondering why the holidays always felt a little lonely. Why they never had big trees, or loud dinners, or cousins to play with. And when she had asked if they could visit him this year, Amelia said yes, even though everything in her gut told her no. But now, watching Kaya extend a gift, a real one, from the heart, into the hands of a man who had just mocked her, Amelia saw something rare. Pure. Unbreakable. This child wasn't like them. She wasn't jaded or bitter. She hadn't built walls or sharpened her words into weapons. She came to give. She came to share. And even now, after being handed nothing but an empty box and a room full of silence, she still believed in giving. Amelia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Not yet. Because something told her this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The air in the room shifted. Kaya stood before her grandfather with both hands outstretched, holding the small, folded piece of paper as if it were the most important thing in the world. Her voice had been soft, barely above a whisper, yet it had cut through the room like thunder. "I got you a gift too, Grandpa." No one moved. Frank looked down at her, clearly caught off guard. His smirk faltered. For a moment, his eyes darted toward Sandra, who had paused mid-scroll on her phone, her eyes flicking between her niece and her father. Amelia sat frozen on the couch, afraid to even breathe, watching every second unfold. Frank leaned forward and took the paper, more out of curiosity than anything else. He didn't say a word. He simply unfolded the paper with slow, deliberate movements, his thick fingers trembling just slightly at the edges. His eyes scanned the contents. First, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. Then something changed. His brows lowered, not in anger, but in something quieter, something heavier. His shoulders, always stiff with pride and certainty, sagged just a little. His mouth, so quick to sneer or scoff, didn't move at all. He looked at the paper again, as if to confirm what he was seeing. Silence. Not the tense, uncomfortable kind, but something deeper. A pause in time. Frank stood up slowly. He didn't look at Kaya. He didn't look at Amelia or Sandra. He clutched the paper in one hand and quietly walked out of the room, his heavy footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath them. The front door didn't slam. There were no parting words. Just the faint sound of the door clicking shut behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Kaya stood still, her arms now at her sides, looking at the space where her grandfather had just been. She didn't seem surprised. She didn't seem hurt. There was only a gentle calm on her face, as if she had given him something important, and was okay letting it go. "What was on the paper?" Sandra asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Kaya looked over at her aunt but didn't answer. Instead, she walked back to the couch and sat beside her mother, curling into her side. Amelia instinctively wrapped her arms around her daughter and held her tightly, breathing in the soft scent of her hair, blinking back tears. In her embrace, Amelia felt something she hadn't in a long time, peace. Not because things were fixed. Not because anyone had apologized. But because her daughter, in her quiet way, had shifted the ground beneath them all. Amelia had expected pain that day. She had expected cruelty. What she hadn't expected was her daughter's quiet strength. The grace she had shown. The way she had offered something meaningful in the face of rejection. She looked down at Kaya, who was now humming softly to herself, and wondered what she had written. Part of her wanted to ask. Part of her felt she shouldn't. Because whatever it was, it had been between Kaya and her grandfather. And it had mattered. Across the room, Sandra stood up slowly, her face unreadable. She left her phone on the table, something she never did, and walked toward the window. She stared out into the cold winter afternoon, watching the trees sway in the breeze. "I've never seen Dad like that," she said quietly. Neither had Amelia. And though the silence that followed was thick with questions, none of them were spoken aloud. Because in that moment, something more powerful had happened than any confrontation, any argument, any shouting match. A child had given a gift. One that wasn't wrapped in paper or expectation, but in sincerity. And it had changed everything. Christmas night fell with a quietness that felt heavier than snow. The house, once bustling with the clatter of dishes, paper wrapping, and shallow holiday chatter, had gone still. Kaya's gift, the tiny, folded piece of paper she had given to her grandfather, remained a mystery. But its impact lingered like an echo. Frank never returned to the living room. He didn't join the family for Christmas dinner. He didn't shout, didn't complain about the food, didn't scoff at anyone's efforts. He simply vanished into the back of the house, shutting the door to his study with a soft, definitive click. Kaya didn't ask about him. She didn't look toward the hallway or seem anxious about his absence. Instead, she quietly resumed playing with a small doll she'd brought from home, a gift from her mother from years past, worn at the edges, but loved beyond measure. When dinner was served, Kaya ate beside her mother, speaking only when spoken to, helping herself to mashed potatoes and carrots, then offering to help clear the dishes afterward. Her Aunt Sandra made a few half-hearted attempts at conversation, but her comments, stripped of their usual sharpness, landed flat. No one laughed. No one scolded Kaya again. The house was hushed, as if everyone were tiptoeing around an invisible crack in the floor, unsure what would happen if they pressed too hard. Kaya's mother, Mira, watched her daughter with a heart aching in too many places to count. Guilt and gratitude warred inside her. Guilt for bringing Kaya here, for hoping that somehow a few ornaments and familiar faces would smooth over years of neglect. Gratitude for her daughter's resilience, her quiet strength, her kindness, her ability to give even when she received nothing in return. That night, after the dishes were done and the kitchen lights dimmed, Mira helped Kaya into bed in the cold guest room. The sheet smelled faintly of mothballs and old cedar, and Kaya shivered as she crawled under the covers. Mira lay beside her for a while, rubbing warmth into her daughter's hands and brushing stray strands of hair from her forehead. "Are you okay?" Mira asked softly, her voice barely more than a breath. Kaya nodded once, her eyes wide in the dark. "I'm okay, Mommy." Mira hesitated. "Do you want to talk about what happened earlier? With Grandpa?" Kaya was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "Not right now. Maybe later." Mira didn't push. She kissed Kaya's temple, whispered a soft goodnight, and waited until her breathing slowed into sleep before slipping out of the room. As she passed by Frank's study, she paused. There was no sound behind the door. No muttering, no shuffling. Just silence. The next morning, the sky was still gray when Mira quietly packed their things. She didn't wake anyone. She let Kaya sleep until the last minute, then gently helped her dress and carry their suitcase downstairs. The tree still sparkled in the corner, lights twinkling against unopened boxes and carefully hung stockings that no one would touch again this year. They left a note on the counter, simple and polite. "Thank you for having us. We're heading back early. Mira and Kaya." Kaya's boots crunched on the gravel driveway as they loaded the car. Mira kept glancing back at the house, expecting the door to open, for someone to call after them, for her father to say something, anything, but nothing happened. No one appeared. As Mira started the engine, Kaya looked out the window at the frosted yard. "Will we come back next year?" The question made Mira pause. She put the car in drive, eyes on the long stretch of road ahead, the trees bending gently in the morning wind. "I don't know, sweetie. Maybe. Maybe not." Kaya accepted that answer with a quiet nod. She leaned back in her seat, her hands folded in her lap. The car was filled with silence for a while, but it wasn't tense. It wasn't cold. It was just still. After about half an hour, Kaya finally spoke again. "Do you think Grandpa read the whole note?" Mira glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I think he did. He looked pretty surprised." Kaya didn't say anything for a moment. Then she added, "It wasn't mean. I just wrote how I felt. I told him I hoped he wasn't always sad. And that I loved him, even if he didn't love me back." Myra's throat tightened. She gripped the steering wheel more firmly, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. "You're a very brave girl, Kaya." "I didn't feel brave," Kaya murmured, staring out at the trees. "I just didn't want to be mean like him." Mira reached back blindly, her fingers finding Kaya's small hand. She squeezed it once, gently. Back at home, the day passed quietly. Mira unpacked while Kaya drew pictures on the kitchen table. The usual cheer of post-holiday mornings didn't return this time. No leftover cookies, no phone calls from relatives, no laughter echoing down the hallway. But there was a peace in the house that Mira hadn't felt in years. That night, as Mira tucked Kaya into her own bed, Kaya looked up at her and asked, "Do you think he'll ever write back?" Mira brushed hair from Kaya's cheek. "I don't know, baby. Maybe. Sometimes people change. Sometimes they don't." Kaya nodded, pulling her blanket up to her chin. "I hope he does. I don't want him to be lonely forever." Mira kissed her daughter goodnight and turned out the light. In the quiet that followed, she sat in the living room alone for a long time, sipping tea that had gone cold, thinking about old wounds and second chances. Back at Frank's house, the living room remained untouched. But in his study, the old man sat at his desk, the paper still clutched in his hand. His eyes were red, his face drawn. On the paper, written in crayon, were the words, "I still love you even when you don't smile at me. I hope one day you're not so sad. Merry Christmas, Grandpa." He read it again. And again. And again. 4 days after Christmas, the air outside was cold and quiet, blanketed with a soft layer of snow that made everything feel hushed and far away. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to break the silence. Kaya and her mother, Mira, had returned to their small apartment on the edge of town. Life was slowly returning to normal, or at least trying to. Mira was still nursing a quiet ache in her chest from their visit with Frank, and though Kaya never mentioned it, Mira could see that something had changed in her daughter too, something deeper, harder to name. That morning, as Mira made tea in the kitchen, Kaya stood by the window. She liked watching the snowflakes dance down from the sky, each one a tiny, delicate secret. Suddenly, she noticed something on the front step. It was a small brown package, unmarked, no postage, no return address. "Mama," she called softly, not taking her eyes off it, "there's something outside." Mira came over, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She squinted out the window and frowned. "That's odd. We're not expecting anything." Curious but cautious, Mira opened the door. The air rushed in, crisp and cold, as she reached down and picked up the box. It was light in her hands, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a single piece of string. No label. No name. Kaya followed her mother to the kitchen table. Mira untied the string and peeled away the paper. Inside the box was something unexpected, a small, beautifully carved wooden music box. Mira turned it over in her hands. The wood was smooth, polished, and dark, with tiny etchings of stars and clouds on the surface. On the underside, there was a little winding key. Nestled beside the music box was a folded note, written in a shaky but familiar hand. Mira opened it carefully. The words were few, but they carried weight. "To the bravest girl I know. Thank you for remembering her." There was no signature. But Mira didn't need one. She knew. And Kaya knew too. Mira looked over at her daughter, who stood quietly with her hands clasped in front of her, staring at the music box. "Do you want to hear it?" Mira asked gently. Kaya nodded. Mira turned the key. The box clicked softly and then began to play. The melody was delicate and haunting, "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." As the song filled the small kitchen, Mira's breath caught in her throat. That song. It was her mother's favorite. Tears welled in Mira's eyes. She hadn't heard it in years, not since before her mother had passed. She looked at Kaya, who was listening with a small smile on her face, her eyes distant and dreamy. "Where did this come from?" Mira asked, though she already knew. Kaya didn't answer right away. She waited until the final note of the melody faded into silence, as if the song needed to be honored before anything else could be said. Then she spoke, her voice soft but sure. "I think Grandpa sent it." Mira nodded slowly. "I think so too." After a moment, she asked the question she'd been holding on to since Christmas Day. "Kaya, what did you draw on that paper? The one you gave Grandpa?" Kaya turned to her, her expression calm. "I drew a picture of Grandpa holding hands with Grandma and me. We were standing in a garden. There were flowers and a rainbow. I wrote, 'I hope you smile again one day.'" Mira felt her heart twist. That simple image, so pure, so full of hope, had done what years of bitterness could not. It had reached Frank. It had touched something long buried deep within him, something he had tried to forget: love. That garden. Mira remembered it too. It was a real place, behind the old house where she'd grown up. Her mother used to plant lilies and tulips there every spring. Frank had built the bench that still sat in the corner, worn and moss-covered. Before life got hard, before grief closed his heart, Frank had once been a man who smiled easily. Who laughed. Who danced with his wife under the stars. Mira sat down, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. "He must have kept it," she whispered. "Your drawing." Kaya nodded. "He didn't throw it away. I think it reminded him." Mira reached out and pulled her daughter into a hug. Kaya climbed onto her lap and leaned her head against her mother's chest. "I'm so proud of you," Mira said, her voice thick. "You were so brave, and so kind, even when they weren't." Kaya didn't say anything. She just closed her eyes and listened to her mother's heartbeat. Later that afternoon, Mira placed the music box on Kaya's bedside table. Every night after that, Kaya would wind it up before bed, letting the song play as she drifted off to sleep. It became a ritual, a soft, soothing sound that carried her into dreams. Mira, too, found comfort in it. Sometimes she would sit outside Kaya's room, listening to the tune and remembering her own mother's voice. The music softened something in her, too. It reminded her that healing didn't always come in the ways you expected. Sometimes it came in silence, in small acts of courage, in a child's drawing, or a melody from the past. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. This time it had a return address, Frank's. Inside was a longer note, Written in the same trembling handwriting, "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. I've been angry for so long, I forgot how to feel anything else. But Kaya reminded me of who I used to be. Of who your mother saw in me. I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember." Mira folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer next to the music box. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, like music boxes, were small but powerful things. It had been a full week since the small package arrived, since Kaya opened the music box and let the gentle tune of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" fill the quiet corners of their little home. Every night since, she had wound the key, letting the notes lull her to sleep with thoughts of kindness, not cruelty. Frank had not called. He hadn't shown up at their door. He hadn't tried to explain what happened that Christmas afternoon or offer any sort of apology. But that didn't mean nothing had changed. One chilly morning, as frost clung to the windows and Kaya slept soundly in her bed, her mother, Mira, opened the mailbox and found a letter tucked among the usual flyers and bills. There was no return address, just her name, scrawled in an unfamiliar but unmistakably masculine hand. She hesitated for a long moment, staring at the envelope. Her heart beat faster. She considered throwing it away without reading it. She didn't want more pain, didn't want empty words or veiled insults hidden behind formal sentences. But something about the handwriting, or perhaps the silence that had followed the music box, urged her to open it. She sat down at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling slightly in her fingers. She peeled it open carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "I was wrong about you," it began. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a long letter. It didn't try to explain years of resentment or pain. It didn't beg forgiveness, and it didn't pretend to understand the full weight of the past. But it was something. "She's a good kid," the letter continued. "You did right by her. I hope you're doing okay." Mira read the words again and again, her fingers brushing over the rough paper. There were no flourishes. No dramatic declarations. Just a few sentences, honest, raw, and utterly unexpected. It wasn't the kind of letter you frame or save in a box with keepsakes. But it cracked something open inside her, something she hadn't realized she'd sealed shut years ago. It was not a fix, not a neat resolution, but it was a shift. And that shift was real. Later that morning, Mira watched Kaya at the breakfast table, her little fingers carefully tracing the carved edges of the wooden music box. She opened it and let the melody play as she slowly spooned cereal into her mouth, the music blending with the sound of clinking dishes and birdsong outside the window. "Do you still think about Grandpa?" Mira asked softly. Kaya looked up and nodded. "Yeah. I think about him when I hear the song. It makes me feel not sad. Just kind of warm." Mira smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Kaya's forehead. "Do you remember what you said to him in that picture? You never told me everything." Kaya's eyes brightened a little, and she nodded. "I drew him holding hands with Grandma and me. We were in the garden. There were sunflowers and bees and Grandma was laughing. I told him I hope he smiles again someday." Mira felt tears well in her eyes, not out of sadness, but because of the fierce, radiant beauty of her daughter's heart. Kaya hadn't drawn pain or anger. She hadn't demanded justice or cried for attention. She had offered a memory, a possibility, a vision of who Frank had once been and who he might still become, even if just for a moment. That drawing, that small gesture of imagination and hope, had reached a place Mira thought was long dead inside her father. And even though he hadn't returned a phone call or stepped back into their lives, he had listened. He had seen it. And that, in itself, was something to hold on to. Kaya now kept the music box on her bedside table. Every night before bed, she opened it for just a few seconds, letting the song fill her room. She never played it all the way through. She said she liked knowing there was more music left, like saving some hope for tomorrow. One night, as Mira tucked her in, she asked, "Why do you think he sent the music box?" Kaya thought for a moment. Because he remembered. Not just Grandma. But maybe he remembered being happy once. Maybe he forgot for a long time, but the picture helped him remember. Mira kissed her daughter's forehead and turned off the light, her chest tight with emotion. Her daughter had given something neither she nor Sandra nor even time itself had been able to give Frank, a reason to soften. In the days that followed, Mira found herself thinking about what it meant to protect Kaya. For so long, she had believed her role was to shield her daughter from all pain, all cruelty, all the sharp edges of the world. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe what Kaya needed wasn't protection from the world, but the tools to face it. The strength to meet cruelty with kindness. The clarity to recognize what mattered. The courage to stand in front of pain and not run, but offer it something unexpected, grace. Mira had tried to change her father for years, had screamed, begged, pleaded, and finally walked away. Nothing worked. But Kaya had done it with a drawing and a few gentle words. She hadn't done it to change him. She'd done it because she believed in kindness, even when it wasn't returned. That was the difference. That was her strength. The story didn't end in hugs or reunions or letters spilling out week after week. Frank didn't suddenly become a kind old man who showed up for birthdays or sent thoughtful gifts. But he had written once. And he had sent a song. That was enough, for now. And so, their lives went on. Simple. Quiet. Full of soft beginnings and small triumphs. Sometimes, Mira would sit by the window while Kaya played nearby, listening to the faint sound of the music box drifting through the air, and she would think of the message she would carry with her always. Sometimes, a whisper of love is stronger than a lifetime of silence.